A reading from the Gospel of Luke. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum.' And he said, 'Truly, I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown.' But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine all over the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to the widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian." When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. Here ends the reading of words that give us insight on God. May God grant to us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
Ah, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Burr, sir.
Did you hear the news about good old General Mercer?
No.
You know Claremont Street?
Yeah.
They renamed it after him. The Mercer legacy is secure.
Sure.
And all he had to do was die.
Yeah, that's a lot less work.
We ought to give it a try. Now how you gonna get your debt plan through?
I guess I'm gonna finally have to listen to you.
Really?
Talk less, smile more, do whatever it takes to get my plan on the Congress floor.
Now Madison and Jefferson are merciless.
Well, hate the sin, love the sinner.
Hamilton.
I'm sorry, Burr, I gotta go.
But
decisions are happening over dinner.
two Virginians and an immigrant walk into a room diametrically opposed foes. They emerged with a compromise, having opened doors that were previously closed. Bros. The immigrant emerges with unprecedented financial power, a system he can shape however he wants. The Virginians emerge with the nation's capital. And here's the pièce de résistance. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens. Thomas claims
Alexander was on Washington's doorstep one day in distress and disarray.
Thomas claims
Alexander said,
I've nowhere else to turn,
and basically begged me to join the fray.
Thomas claims
I approached Madison and said, I know you hate him, but let's hear what he has to say.
Thomas claims
Well, I arranged the meeting, I arranged the menu, the venue, the seating.
But no one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one really knows how the parties get to yes, the pieces that are sacrificed in every game of chess. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens. Meanwhile, Madison is grappling with the fact that not every issue can be settled by committee. Meanwhile, Congress is fighting over where to put the capital. It isn't pretty. Then Jefferson approaches with the dinner and invite, and Madison responds with Virginian insight.
Maybe we can solve one problem with another and win a victory for the Southerners. In other words, a quid pro quo.
I suppose.
Wouldn't you like to work a little closer to home?
Actually, I would.
Well, I propose the Potomac.
And you'll provide him his votes.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Let's go.
No.
What else was in the room where it happened? The room where it happened. The room where it happened. No one else was in the room where it happened. The room where it happened. The room where it happened.
My God, in God to trust,
but we never really know what got discussed.
click,
Room where it happened.
and no one else is in the room where it happened.
Alexander Hamilton.
What did they say to you to get you to sail New York City down the river?
Alexander Hamilton.
Did Washington know about the dinner? Was there presidential pressure to deliver?
Alexander Hamilton.
Or did you know even then it doesn't matter where you put the U.S. Capitol?
Cause we'll have the banks, we're in the same spot.
You got more than you gave.
And I wanted what I got. When you got skin in the game, you stay in the game. But you don't get a win unless you play in the game. Oh, you get love for it, you get hate for it, you get nothing if you wait for it, wait for it, wait. God help and forgive me, I wanna build something that's gonna outlive me. What do you want, Bert? What do you want, Bert? If you stand for nothing, Bert, what do you fall for?
I wanna be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. I wanna be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. I wanna be in the room where it happens. I wanna be in the room where it happens. Close your eyes.
They wanna lead us to save the day.
We don't get a say in what they trade away.
We dream of a brand new start,
but we dream in the dark for the most part. Dark as a tomb where it happens. I've got to be in the room. I've got to be. I've got to be. I've got to be in the room. I gotta be. I gotta be.
So what does the musical Hamilton and the song The Room Where It Happens have to do with the Jubilee USA Network and global debt relief? As it understands, or as it happens a lot actually, it helps us to understand the work that Jubilee USA Network is doing right now. But before we get to that, a quick little history of Jubilee. So in the years leading up to the turn of the century, there was a global movement which was largely spurred by the Vatican for Jubilee, for global debt relief. After the turn of the century, that became more nationally based and organizations began to develop. The U.S. version of that is the Jubilee USA Network, which is a coalition of over 650 faith and secular communities working for systemic reform. Jubilee has won billions, that's billions with a B, billions of dollars of debt relief. One of the first things that I discovered when I came to University Christian Church was that we were a Jubilee congregation, because I believe it was my first Sunday here, Johnny Wilson came up to me and said, "Caleb, we need to plan a Jubilee Sunday for Jubilee USA Network." And I said, "I don't know what that is." And she said, "It works for global debt relief." And I was no stranger to global movements for working for those who are the most vulnerable. I had done a fellowship in seminary with Bread for the World, where we had advocated for policy change that helped poor and hungry people all around the world. And so I quickly found a heart for Jubilee and got more and more involved. So this congregation has been involved with Jubilee for around 20 years, I believe. Jubilee does a lot of incredible work. They work domestically to combat payday lenders. They advised the Biden administration on the policies that were implemented last year for student loan forgiveness that impacted the lives of so many people in our country as they forgave millions of student loan debt that burdened people. Jubilee has worked very hard on the debt restructure of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is often treated like a U.S. colony, as so many of you know. And I had the honor about 4 years ago of sitting in the room with the Financial Debt Restructure Oversight Committee in Puerto Rico, where we got to present Jubilee's ideas for how that restructure should work, most of which they took and began to implement. And Jubilee works for those countries all around the world that are indebted to the United States. There are a ton of countries that are indebted to the United States. Many of them are developing countries. So as you probably know, if you're a part of the developing world and you owe a ton of money to the United States, then instead of investing in infrastructure, you have to pay that money back, which means that the most vulnerable are the people who are the hardest hit, meaning that people die from starvation, that people die from dehydration, that they die from preventable disease. And so when debts are forgiven, it means that countries are able to invest in the most vulnerable. So, admittedly, what Jubilee does is a little wonky. It's a little hard to understand. I mean, thinking about corporate tax transparency, combating vulture funds, working with senators and representatives on legislation that is all very technical, can be very hard to understand. But luckily, we were given the gift of Hamilton by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think we should give such kudos to Miranda for making us care about a largely forgotten founding father and for helping us to understand the Compromise of 1790, which is something that probably when we were reading about in our history books, we fell asleep reading about. And yet, Lin-Manuel Miranda turned that compromise into one of the most memorable songs of Hamilton, The Room Where It Happens. So in this song, we find out that Hamilton is trying to get his debt plan through Congress, right? Each of the states has its own individual debt after the Revolutionary War, and Hamilton thinks that in order for this new fledgling country to survive, that the states shouldn't have to pay that debt back themselves, but the federal government should assume that debt. Some states, like Virginia, had plenty of money and wouldn't have any problem, but other states might not be able to pay off their debt. In comparison, Jefferson and Madison wanted the nation's capital to be not in New York City in the north, but in the south, in Virginia and Maryland. And so the Compromise of 1790 happened behind closed doors, the room where it happens, the room where it happens, right? And in that compromise, they strike a deal. And in return for supporting the federal government, assuming the debt of the states, the nation's capital goes on the Potomac, what becomes Washington, D.C. So that does have to do with debt, you see, but that's not the part that pertains to Jubilee USA. The part that pertains to Jubilee USA, and something that most people do not know, comes at the end of the song when Aaron Burr comes in and he says, "Alexander Hamilton, what did they say to you to get you to sell New York City down the river? Did Washington know about it? Was there presidential pressure to deliver?" And then he says, wait, even then it doesn't matter, because New York got the banks, right? You're in the same spot. Yes, New York State has the nation's banks, which means that the state of New York holds most of the world's debt. Did you know this? That means that changing New York state law impacts more people around the world than changing federal law. And so much of what Jubilee has been doing over the past several years has been working with New York state legislators to change New York state law to impact people all around the world. And so when I was at the European Debt and Development Conference this summer, one of the things that people all around the world were talking about was the movement for Jubilee and how Jubilee USA Network had been affecting change through the state of New York that impacted people all around the world. And you all are a part of that, whether you know it or not. You know, one of the things that I think we do as people sometimes is we get into this problem of dichotomous thinking. We think things are either or, that it's black and white. And so a lot of times a question that I hear is it better to do charity or to work for justice, systemic change? And I think the answer to that is yes. Both are necessary, right? And so one of the things that I love about University Christian Church is that we try to do both. That in January, we talk about Jubilee USA, that we take our yearly offering for Jubilee USA, but also throughout the year, we sign on to petitions, we do letter writing campaigns. You allow me to volunteer my time to serve on Jubilee's executive committee. And then in February, we talk about Week of Compassion, and we give money to help people who are suffering here and now. So it's a lot like that old proverb, you know, that if you're standing on the bank of a river and you see someone drowning, then of course you should jump in and help that person so they don't drown. Charity. And if another person comes along, you help them as well. But if enough people come along down the river drowning, you start thinking, I wonder if somebody's throwing them in up the river. And you walk up the river and you help people along the way, but then you stop the person throwing them in the river. That is justice. That is systemic change. And both of those things are necessary to really enact change in our world. So thank you, University Christian Church, for being a part of a global movement for change. I hope that you're able to give generously to Jubilee USA Network, but if not, that you'll be able to continue to support the organization through prayers as we work for a more just economy for all. May it be so, and thanks be to God. Amen.